York City spends roughly $42,000 a year per student, but my parents, they only spend a few $100s a year homeschooling me. And while New York City students' proficiency in reading and math continues to be record lows, I, for contrast, by the time I was 14 years old, was able to score a 30 on the ACT. So either my parents accidentally discovered a miracle education system just sitting in our living room, or America has been lying to itself about what children actually need. Because the problem with the modern education system isn't funding. The problem is that we try to replace parents with systems. I want to tell you my story and show you exactly how the West is failing its children. Long ago, I was born to two wonderful parents. Let's call them Song Integrity and Song Grace. My father, he was in the Navy, and my mother was a stay-at-home mom. Now, she actually did have a career. She went to college, she had a degree, she had a stable, well-paying job, but she gave it up just to stay home to raise me, which is a sacrifice and investment that I will forever appreciate. She saw the raising of her child as more important than her career. As for my father, he was gone for months at a time at sea, and Grace was home with me, teaching me to read, write, long before most children even thought about it. I knew the alphabet and started reading when I was 2, and she was responsible for teaching me strong penmanship, grammar, and rudimentary mathematics. My father, when he was home, was responsible for instructing me to read classic literature and for teaching me algebra, which I started when I was about 4 or 5. By the time I was 6, I was reading the unabridged versions of Gulliver's Travels, Pilgrim's Progress, The Count de Monte Cristo, which, if you're familiar with those stories, they can be hefty reading, even for adults. I remember my dad had this rule where I had to write down every single word that I didn't know in those books. I had to write them down on a sheet of paper and look up the definitions in a dictionary. I know, crazy. I had to write down the definition next to each word, and I'd have reams and reams of paper of all the words I didn't know, which was pretty much every other word from those books. And I used to hate doing this. Sure, the stories were fun, but writing every other word on infinite sheets of paper I thought was rather laborious, to put it lightly, and I definitely didn't appreciate it at the time. And every day after I was done reading that chapter or whatever, my dad would look through the papers of all the words that I had written down, and if he thought I didn't write enough down, he'd look up the chapter I was supposed to have read, and he would just start randomly asking me words that were in that chapter, and ask me what the definitions of them were. And if I couldn't give a satisfactory definition after about 2 or 3 words, he would have me reread the chapter and start all over. Yeah, there was no skipping out on that assignment. And those lists of words would sometimes go into vocabulary and spelling lists later, which my parents made themselves. So by the time I was 10, I actually had a greater vocabulary than most adults. And when I look back, I realized that with the sheer volume of information my parents threw at me, that meant I absorbed a baseline of knowledge and critical thinking before most kids are even out of elementary school. But this foundation was the system that my parents built because they cared. They valued education. They valued the seeking of knowledge. And sometimes when I talk to people, especially on social media, it feels like I've often just forgotten more things than most people will ever know in their lives. And I mean that in a way that's actually not a good thing as far as other Americans are concerned, but more on that later. My parents taught me science and history, and my dad would have these reenactments of classic literature and stories like the Iliad and the Odyssey and other mythologies. We would have playtime where I would have to, with hints of course, figure out how to slay Medusa without turning to stone, or reenact how I was completely invulnerable until some soldier clipped my ankle with an arrow. My dad would dip me in the tub playfully by the ankle and reenact being dipped in the river Styx, if you know the story of Achilles. I had so many memories of my dad just taking time and just teaching me tons of mythologies and just give me a history of the world that was alive and entertaining and engaging. I could go on for a while about how my father found ways to teach that were engaging for me, but it was obvious my parents valued education highly. They taught me how to be a moral person from a young age, to respect God and respect my elders, to say yes sir, yes ma'am, to speak only when spoken to, you know, all those old adages. I was to listen when spoken to by an adult. I was to respond when I was called. And I was never, ever, ever to throw tantrums or roll my eyes. That was just straight out a no-no. And I was taught that lying was the worst thing I could possibly do. Oh, only second to sassing my mother, which of course would have just resulted in Armageddon immediately. These are things that many children, if not most, in the West are simply not taught today. The West treats children as if they're smaller adults to be reasoned with instead of to be guided and instructed, and if necessary, punished. A child does not have the logical mind of an adult. He's not capable of processing consequences in the same way that an adult can. So a parent must take the time to teach what the consequences of actions are. I would grow up seeing other children throw tantrums or curse their parents out in the store, and that would be so foreign to me. Like I couldn't even comprehend it. It was clear that the children were being put on a path to failure later in life. If they couldn't understand the basics of respect early on in their formative years, how could they possibly learn it later? And if they did, would it already be too late? Now, as far as education itself is concerned, not everything was completely ad hoc. My parents actually spent a few $100s a year on it. That's right, a few $100. Even if they ordered a curriculum that was pre-made, like ACE, Accelerated Christian Education, which had all the subjects encapsulated easily for the parents to administer to the children, including homework, quizzes, and tests, etc. It didn't cost that much. And that's a far cry from the $13,000 a year the average American spends on daycare, or the $42,000 a year that New York spends per student on education. Now keep in mind, the quality of this education that students get from New York and Baltimore, for that $42,000 a year, is actually worse than I got for a few hundred. Significantly worse. And that's the problem. People constantly scream about how we need more funding for schools. We need more pay for teachers. We need more technology in the classrooms. We just need to pass a bill for more free school lunches. We can't have children starving. It's gonna mess up their education. And while sure, all those things are seemingly well-meaning, the reality is that none, and I mean this sincerely, literally none of these things are the problem. Not a single one. The problem is that parents are sold a lie. They believe that the public school system can educate their children. But the problem is, without parental involvement or really good involved teachers, it is fundamentally unable to solve the problem. Teachers cannot fix absent fathers, checked out mothers, chaotic homes, addiction, divorce, neglect, or even a culture that teaches children that discipline is oppression. A teacher will have a hard time being a better role model than some random punk on the street, or a rap artist dropping the latest album. Even the best teacher would be hard-pressed to get a child to put aside all distractions and focus on their education, both in school and out of school.
6 7 6 7 6 7 6 7
The parents are the ones who need to be involved. The parents are the ones who need to instruct their child, to teach them that education is important. And it is the parents, ultimately the ones that are capable of solving these problems. Now, I shared how I was reading when I was 2 or 3 years old. And in fact, I thought this was the norm until I was about 12, I think. It just didn't cross my mind that someone wouldn't be able to read basic letters or words, at least, by the time they can hold full conversations, right? I mean, that just makes sense. If you can talk, you should be able to read. I remember helping to run a bus route for my church. Like, I was literally a runner. The one who would knock on doors early Sunday morning to get kids to come to the bus, to come to church for Sunday school. And one day, we had a special stop, and as a result, we were in an unfamiliar area. I asked one of the kids what the street sign said at the corner, because, well, we were a bit lost. But I'll never forget, that kid turned around and looked at me all wild and said, "Are you crazy? We don't learn to read till we're 5 or 6 years old." And that's it. That, right there, that is part of the problem. Not only do parents believe that the public school system can properly instruct their children, and thus they have doubly pushed the responsibility of instructing children over to the system without being involved, but we also waste several years of their lives before even beginning to teach the important skills. Here's a practical application of why that matters. When I was 11, I took achievement tests that were mandated by the state that I was living in at the time. My scores ranged from post-high school to post-college. I know because they gave a range of where their scores would fall for various subjects. And when I was 14 years old, I took the ACT and got a 30. Now, keep in mind, a perfect score is a 36, and a 33 is a score where Ivy League colleges start to take you seriously. I think at the time, 30 might have been a minimum just to get into Harvard. But I was 14, 4 years before I should even have been taking that test. I remember specifically, my English and comprehension in the ACT was rated the top 3 percentile, and my math and other subjects were top 5 percentile. In other words, my English and comprehension was literally the top 3% of everyone who took that test, and my math was the top 5%. How do you think this has prepared me for life? How do you think this has accelerated me into having the potential for success? Do you think it has changed the trajectory of my life immensely by having parents that or involved, and at the very least have instilled a desire for knowledge and learning? Of course, has. Yes, these are things public school can't do, at least not easily. My parents are the ones who set me on a course for success. But also, consider this. I don't consider myself that special. I'm blessed, yes, but most parents could have done the same things that my parents did. Then I wouldn't be above 95% of Americans in learning. I would be normal, average, and frankly, I would rather live in a world where everyone's parents made the choices that mine did. And honestly, that's the part that bothers me most. I don't think my childhood should have been exceptional. I think that a serious education, a moral foundation, and involved parents should be normal. I want the average American to have a strong moral foundation, to have a sense for community, and a desire to raise a family. They wouldn't be in prison. They would never see the inside of a jail. Crime would be almost non-existent. Education costs would be borderline nothing. People would be able to think critically.
Think, Mark!
And not just accept whatever a politician comes along and tells them at face value. Conversations on social media wouldn't constantly be a waste of time. Probably. And you would actually be able to change the other person's mind with facts and logic. Now that might sound like a utopia, but it's one that people can actually achieve. But it requires parents to actually invest themselves in their children's future. But instead, what we have now is a culture obsessed with consumerism. It sees children as an obstacle to career and success, and sends children that we do have off to a school system or daycare to be raised. And let me be clear, this didn't happen because my parents just had a ton of time on their hands. As I said earlier, my father was in the Navy. He would spend long stretches at sea. When he was gone, my mother had to run the house and stress over everything she could just to keep the home afloat and teach me all the while. Even now, she would reminisce about how many of the other Navy wives would just cheat on their husbands while they were at sea. Yeah, it was so bad that this was just expected, normal. Of course, a Navy wife would find another man while her husband was gone. After all, he was going to find another woman while he was in some foreign port. It was expected that sailors were going to stop by Japanese or Philippine brothels, so if they can get some while they're out, certainly the wife can. And the children? Well, they would suffer, either because the mother is out partying, and the children either have to raise themselves or spend a ton of time with a sitter or a relative, or even as a result of the messy divorce later. Yeah, just because it was normal didn't mean they didn't have consequences. No matter what the man is out at sea doing that you shouldn't be, none of them are happy to get a Dear John letter. But overall, I think the lesson here is that people make time for the things that they value. And my parents, they made time for me. My greatest memories was staying up till 3 a.m. with my dad playing random video games. After a long day of work, he would come home, work on schooling or paperwork or whatever courses he had. And then after that, tired and exhausted, he would spend time with me instead of just going to bed. Sometimes my mom hated him for it. Not really hate, but you get what I mean. We will stay up tons of nights playing Red Alert 2, Command & Conquer Generals, and many other games. Those times of my childhood, I will never forget. And there were so many lessons from just passively talking to my dad and playing with my dad and seeing how he dealt with situations even in a fictitious video game. There's so much knowledge and experience that he was able to pass on to me, even during those playtimes, you just can't get at a public school. And you just can't get without being involved in your child's life. I don't think the average person understands everything that they're missing out on. By not having parents who value education, value time with their children, and value religious-based morality. The idea that's important to know not just what's going on in the world, but how to have proper discernment. The idea that morals are absolute. There is a right and wrong. And the only thing that truly changes is our understanding of those morals. You can't train people that it's okay to do just whatever they like, because that will lead to a loss of cohesion, and ultimately, society will descend into a meaningless power struggle for dominance amidst all the cultural chaos, and, well, you know what that means. It means complete societal collapse, and maybe tyranny. But if you don't get anything else out of this video, please understand my core message. If you have children, no matter where you send them, public, private, or homeschooled, you need to be involved in your children's lives. Gone are the days where we can merely toss them to the wind and hope that they turn out right. You must enforce your beliefs and your values and your virtues into their hearts and minds while they're young. Because one of the major reasons that society has failed, or at the very least is failing, is because we've considered ourselves smarter than God when he says, train up a child in the way he should go. and when he is old, he will not depart from it. The lesson here isn't everyone must homeschool, even though, frankly, I'd definitely rather that happen. The lesson is that children thrive when parents take their responsibility for raising children seriously, and society will collapse when everyone assumes that the system will just do it for them. Do not outsource your child's soul, or at least inspire or help others to properly raise their own. If you're a man, be a mentor for young teens so that they don't have to find one on the street or find one in prison later in life. If you're a grown woman, help a young woman know what they should look for in a man and to know how to properly carry and compose themselves. Whether you're a parent or not, there is something that you, the viewer, can do to make society better, to help children, and to help young men and women as they grow into adults. Look around you. This failure of children is not something that we can afford any longer. Now, if you want to see what happens to society when we stop teaching virtue and critical thinking to children, as we have, check out this video here, where I break down a thought experiment that went viral on social media and prove why a culture built on fake altruism is headed toward total collapse. But whether it's your first time here or you're a long-time viewer, thanks for stopping by, and, well, I'll see you again next time. Bye!